Thanks for watching and listening to the When Love Leads podcast. You'll be hearing today from some of our special guests as they share with you stories of faith at work. You can help more people find out about the podcast by liking us on social media pages like Facebook and LinkedIn. Now, join us as we explore people of faith at work. We are delighted today to be talking to Justin Adams. Justin, welcome. Tell us about yourself.
I am married with 3 wonderful kids and a high schooler and 2 middle schoolers. And I am CEO of a technology startup called iWin. Have a bit of a diverse background, but we're about four years into running this company.
Yeah, Justin, you and I have a little bit of history. We haven't worked at PwC together. And then I think it's worth mentioning that nascent little startup you did a few years back with a successful conclusion. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I started in 2016, previous company called Digitize.ai. And my wife will tell you that ever since she met me when we were 20, that I eventually was going to start a startup and knew I wanted to get some professional experience for that. So left and started a company that automated back office process for healthcare. And really thematically, I thought back office automation was something in the mid-10s, RPA and things like that I saw growing. And I thought that trend would increase. And so took a leap of faith and hung my own shingle and started it. And fortunately was in the right place at the right time and sold it to a private equity firm in 2019.
Justin, you probably don't remember, but I remember while you were still at PwC, us talking briefly about this crazy idea you had. And I was really impressed that you left the security of a regular salary behind and launched out on your own. And congratulations. What a great story you have already. And now you're off to your next venture. Tell us a little bit about that too.
Yeah, thanks. It was definitely a leap of faith, but you had previously done it. I know your company was acquired by PwC, and so there weren't many folks there that could say that they've gone through that entrepreneurial journey. So appreciate your mentorship. Yeah, so after I sold in 2019, right when kind of COVID hit in 2020 in March, decided to take some time off, spend some time with the family. Had neglected some of that relationship given this craziness of the startups, and had some good time off, and quite frankly got bored a lot faster than I thought I would. I think it was May or June of 2020, decided that I wanted to do it again, but this time I wanted to take more risk and try to go bigger. And so I had first time primarily bootstrapped it, had some friends and family capital, but wanted to see what the venture side of the equation looked like. And so decided to, given that my risk tolerance was a little bit higher the second time around, decided to swing a little bit bigger. So going back to my PwC days, knew how bad some of the technology that these professional service firms worked on, and decided to go back and see if I could build some better solutions for the professional firms that I had, worked for. So consulting, audit, tax, et cetera.
Where are you from, Justin?
I grew up in Southern California, and so born and raised, and went out to Midwest Wheaton College for college, and went to the East Coast in DC right afterwards, and went back to Chicago for business school, went back to the East Coast, and been on the East Coast now for about 15 years.
How'd you meet your wife?
We met while studying abroad in London as undergrads. So we went to different schools, but went through the same program and met there and started dating, and a few kind of bumps along the road, but fast forward and we got married a few years later.
And when you're not out changing the world, what do you like to do?
That's a good question. Between work and family, it takes up quite a bit of my time, but I did think it was more important to try to have at least a hobby the second time around, which I didn't have really the first time, and started to golf a little bit. Didn't play growing up, but tried to pick it up in the last couple of years, and just enjoy or try to enjoy the nature even while I'm, hacking it up around the course.
Well, there are a lot of people who like to inflict damage on themselves, Justin. So congratulations on finding that kind of a hobby.
Yeah, thank you. It's definitely masochist for sure.
Well, Justin, you and I not only got to know each other in terms of work, but through some faith initiatives, and I know you're a believer, and would love to get a little bit of your story around your walk with Christ.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born into a family where my parents are both believers and became a believer young as I can remember, and would say that was true back then. And, along the way have had to grow and, take a couple steps forward, a couple steps back, and kind of throughout the different seasons of my life. And as I've dealt with various issues or life just kind of kicking you in the teeth like it does everyone, I've had to definitely figure out what that faith means to me. And so while it's been a long journey, given kind of the arc of my life, it's certainly not been a linear one. And so that's, yeah, kind of high level overview of my faith journey.
And what would you say has had the biggest influence on your faith journey?
Biggest influence, a person or an event or both, or
Yeah, maybe either or both.
yeah. Well, I would say, I was thinking about this the other day as primarily middle schooler and high schooler, was really fortunate to have some wonderful kind of youth leaders and volunteer mentors, kind of men who really poured a lot into me. Your parents are your parents, and they obviously have a huge influence. Having people outside the family that you can go to and grow from. It's definitely blessed having that during that period. Very formative. My son's 13, and I was, just thinking the other day, he's kind of entering, right, the next 3-4 years are going to be super formative, for him and life wise, but, also faith wise. And so I would say that definitely had a big influence. The other big influences, or probably had to do more with just trials, really difficult things, kind of walking through in my life and not knowing it's going to always come out the other side. But eventually when I did, looking back and just realizing how much that grew me. And so don't wish those experiences necessarily on anyone, but definitely are very formative, in terms of challenging if my faith was real or if it was, just something that had been there, so especially since I, had at such a young age. Was it just kind of something I had grown up with, or was it something that I was going to actually kind of live out and kind of cling to in those difficult times?
Any one in particular there, Justin, that you'd feel comfortable sharing with somebody who's maybe going through the same thing?
Yeah, I've had a couple periods. I'd say the most recent one probably started 2017, 18. My son, who was 6 or 7 at the time, overnight started showing very different kind of behavior than he previously had, and it started probably a 3 to 4 year journey just to get the right diagnosis. And so he was bringing in the specialist, trying to figure out what's going on, thinking that you found the root cause and not, and kind of the uncertainty of that was difficult. And all the whole time he was deteriorating physically, emotionally, everything. It turns out he had this undiagnosed brain inflammation that was causing both physical and emotional outbursts, but also um, his degradation mentally from being in second grade. He was testing at 7th grade math level to the time he would fast forward 2-3 years, 4th, 5th grade, he couldn't even write his name anymore. And so just dramatic. And then all that time, the tension that in the family that puts on everyone. Sisters were having to lock themselves in their room for their physical safety, and just a really difficult period for everyone, I suppose. emotionally. And then once we did get the correct diagnosis, it was probably about a year to year and a half journey of recovery. And, I look back at that time and I wouldn't wish that on worst enemies. But, happy God is faithful, and, he's fully recovered, fully thriving, eighth grader, straight A student on all the sports teams. If you hadn't, ever met him before, you would have never known kind of what he'd gone through. But you look at pictures of him from a couple of years ago, and you don't even recognize.
How did your faith make a difference during that difficult time? That's a horrible thing to go through, and thrilled, of course, that you're on the other side. But tell us about how your faith impacted that journey.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways. One is that the specific condition he has, the statistics are, I think 95% of marriages end up with divorce. Kids have that condition just because of the marital pressure it puts on everyone on the home front. So hanging on, even when you didn't feel like hanging on, faith definitely impacted, and wanting to, just give up a lot of times, and that could have looked like, there are multiple periods where people were encouraging us to institutionalize him. And one morning in particular, lying in bed, I'm just like pleading with God, almost like a woe is me Job type moment, like, why are you putting us through this kind of thing? And got a very strong sense of, God basically saying to me, he said two things. He said, I will fully heal him, and you're going through this so that you can enter into other people's hidden pain. That was the words, hidden pain, because this overlapped with COVID. So, you think about the isolation that families were going through during that period. And then, so to add that isolation on top of what we were already going through just compounded it. So people weren't able to enter in and help us in meaningful way, just kind of given that the physical barriers that we were put away. So in a lot of ways, it was hidden, right? Our friends and family knew what was going on, but it wasn't obvious to the outside world because of that. So anyways, yeah, I still don't quite fully know what that what that means or what it's going to look like, but we have been able to share, at least with a couple of other families that are going through something similar, our story around that, and hopefully just give them a shred of hope to kind of hold on to.
Well, we don't know who's listening here now, Justin. Is there a name to that diagnosis?
Yes, there is. It's called PANS-PANDA, which is post-acute neurological syndrome, and it's becoming more well known. Stanford actually, it's an autoimmune disease. Stanford Children's Hospital discovered it about 20 years ago, and they're doing a lot of great research on it. But basically, essentially what happens is children between, called the ages of 4 to 12, they'll get a virus like strep throat or pneumonia, and it'll kick off a autoimmune response, which they don't know. Some are type 1 diabetes, right? No one's quite sure why. Maybe you're predisposed to it genetically or whatnot, but your body basically creates antibodies to fight that virus. But then because your autoimmune is triggered, your body never tells that antibodies to turn off. And so what happens is you have a mucus in your blood-brain barrier that thickens when you hit adolescence. But during that age, it's not thick enough, so it allows that virus to actually get up into the brain. So those antibodies are there in their brain, just putting pressure, in various ways to kind of the brain, which is responding to the physical. There are, once you hit puberty, you can't get it, but there are cases that have been undiagnosed that if you have it as a kid and you never treat it, you can have it as an adult. And so I actually think, and if you know the biomarker to look for it, you can find it, but it's not one of the obvious things that someone's going to look for, or the first kind of, examination. But I have a sneaky suspicion that if you went into our prison populations and you tested for it, you find the percentage of folks in there that have this undiagnosed. Because without the resources that we were fortunate to have, that would have been the path that my son, would have gone down.
Well, thank you for sharing about it, but it makes me want to ask about this same time frame. You're starting a new business. Talk to us a little bit about how you were dependent on your Heavenly Father through this process, not only with your son, but now trying to start up a new company. And I think you had new investors and a lot of pressure there too, Justin.
Yeah, I mean, part of the kind of starting a new thing was needing a distraction from this. If me being with him 24 hours a day would have been something that would have been helpful, I would have 100% would have done that. But when I realized that wasn't, I needed to be around, but me just, being fully there wasn't going to make a difference in him and his health journey. I decided, well, I might as well put my energy, productive in my creative energies. And so I was interested. There were multiple times the first year of starting this company where we would do weekly all hand calls with the employees, and I would be taking the all hand calls from his hospital bed, from my son's hospital bed. And so it was stressful on one hand, but it was also an outlet on another. Was life giving from that extent of being able to, while I couldn't necessarily fix or do something with him, I could help create something new and hopefully something that would be life giving for others and value creating for others at the same time. So maybe subconsciously I was trying to offset those things a little bit. I'm not fully sure, but there definitely was some motivation around that.
Candor and transparency is really a gift to us and perhaps to others listening in. I maybe wanted to circle back on one thing because you said you and your wife made it when so many don't. What would you say to the couples that are going through a struggle similar to this?
Yeah. I would say continuing to remind yourself that each other are not the enemy. The enemy is this awful situation you're going through. It's the brokenness of the world, and don't be afraid to go get help and counseling, friends, whatever that looks like. Derek, problem is when you're going through it, it's so acute, you don't really have capacity to get help, and so you're just kind of trying to hang on. And so hang on, and then once the dust has settled, go look for ways to heal. And that the entire family in various different ways have had to process that and try to heal from that. And so that journey is going to look different for everyone, depending on how they're wired and what they went through. But don't be afraid to go and get any kind of spiritual or emotional, help that you need.
Justin, as y'all were walking through that season, is there anything that you did that you wish you hadn't done? Or is there anything you're glad you did as you look back on that season? Maybe that things that didn't seem significant at the time that proved by the end have been really significant, or things you maybe now with the benefit of time would tell another Justin on the front end of a journey like that, what you would really recommend that they do or not do?
Yeah. There's a lot of things I wish I hadn't done. When you're in that kind of intense environment, you can always play what ifs. I would say a couple of things. One is give you and your spouse grace, lots of grace. And even if you mess up in certain ways, realize that there's no perfect recipe for dealing with this stuff, and everyone's trying to kind of figure it out, and people are going to process it very differently, and the way I processed it and handled it was very different than the way my wife processed it and handled it. And I could be very, at the time, very critical of how she was processing it, and she could be very critical of the way I was processing it. And we were both doing what we had to do to survive in our own ways. Now, the other thing, and I did this some, I probably could have done it more, but don't be afraid to ask for help. I pride myself on being self-reliant and able to figure out the next things from my own circumstances, but being humble and enough to admit when you need help and ask for it, and realize that it's okay not to have all the answers and to be able to figure everything out, is both a humbling experience, but also I think definitely one that helps you grow in realizing that self-reliance is maybe not the end-all be-all that some of us in the Western culture are kind of brought up to think that it is.
Good word.
Justin, as you look back with pretty significant success in several different spheres of your career, how have you thought about your identity in Christ relative to when we meet people, it's, hi, what's your name? And the next question is, what do you do? And as you have more success, it's even easier, I think, or more tempting to make our success our identity. And I'm just curious how in several different contexts, it would not be hard to expect the enemy to have been whispering in your ear. And I'm just curious how you've thought about identity and who you are amid some pretty significant success at a pretty early age.
Yeah, it's a great question. That is absolutely something that I have struggled with. And I think most men, especially men and women, but I think men tend to tie their career success or lack thereof to their identity, right? It's not just one way. And so that has definitely been an area where I've had to grow and continue the experience I talked about with my son. One thing that did was that knocked down my identity as a parent, and because we were getting criticism from all types of family members and whatnot before we got the diagnosis, the general rule of thumb was that his behavior and outbursts were due to flaws in our parenting. And so that kind of had to knock that identity down and realize that that couldn't be my identity. Now on the career side, that's something that's again a constant challenge, and even when I started the current company, I said even if it bombed and was not successful in any way, shape, or form, it does not change my identity of who I am. And constantly kind of reminding myself that, and even as we've had some success with this one, reminding myself that even if it all goes to nothing, that's not my calling. I have a calling to be faithful and try to build something in a way that honors and loves people, and gives them an opportunity to flourish and be the best versions of themselves. And certainly not perfect at that in any stretch of the imagination, but that's at least the desire of my heart to do that. And that to me is what success would look like. And if that leads to financial or work success, and that'd be wonderful. And if it doesn't, that doesn't change the motivation of what I was trying to do, regardless of the outcome. So trying to just really focus on the inputs and the things I can control, and be faithful while releasing the outcomes is definitely something that I struggle with on a regular basis, and continue to try to grow in.
Justin, I think most Christians in business, they are certainly trying to apply biblical truths as they work every day. One of the things that tends to come up an awful lot is conflict in the workplace. Tell us a little bit about how you address conflict with a biblical perspective in mind.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one temptation maybe as a Christian is to avoid conflict. I don't think that's the answer, even because my mandate is to love others, and not speaking truth and avoiding conflict is in most, there may be cases where that's appropriate, but a lot of times it's not. And so I think figuring out how to approach conflict in a truthful and loving way is what I try to do. And so, one part of it is not necessary. One part is trying not to create unnecessary conflict where it doesn't exist. And so that could be very easy in business. Make little pokes or jibes or just kind of maybe try to ruffle some feathers to try to get an outcome that you might want. And that's something I've had to try to work on, and of knowing kind of when to hold back. On the other hand, having an appropriate amount of conflict to create a healthy and thriving environment is the right thing. And I think one of the hardest things any leader has to go through, especially, is the decisions of when they have to let someone go, and that's a very difficult thing. And realizing that my company has about 100 people in it now, and if I don't make that difficult decision, I'm harming everyone else that's there, and really you're harming the person that needs to make a change because they're not thriving in their career, and you need to give them an opportunity to go find something that's a better fit. And so that's one specific example of where naturally it may be easier for me to avoid conflict, but learning that that's an appropriate time where, in the right way, you have to make the hard decision and hope to do so in the best way possible, but certainly something that's not easy to do.
Justin, as you deal with people, especially in startups, how do you foster humility when you also need a high degree of confidence to go off charging into this, big black hole that you think there's success on the other side? And, the average village idiot can't go do that. And so you may well be the smartest guy in the room. How have you wrestled with that, with the humility that we are called to have in Christ, while also having the kind of confidence that creates opportunities for 100 people to thrive and to feed their families and meet their needs? And just curious if that's something that you've had to think through some.
Yeah, and certainly part of that is I certainly don't think I'm the smartest person in a situation, because if I was, that means I didn't hire the right people, because I want to always hire someone smarter than myself. Especially, I'm a big believer that everyone has a superpower or superpowers, and finding that, and it's kind of that Jim Collins a little bit, get the right people on the bus and then figure out where they sit later. And so trying to find those people that are more gifted in other areas than you are, and then create an environment where their input can be heard and then flourish. And certainly I may have some gifts and skills and helping pull all that together, and then kind of keeping my mom's a marriage counselor. And I feel like at least half of my day is providing fit therapy to various folks on my team, as we try to create a high functioning team. And so I think for me, personally, I try to live with described as a quiet confidence, and so you have to have confidence. I'd much rather let the results kind of speak for themselves than to go out there and kind of tout them, and certainly giving credit to other folks, and finding people that are low ego, high agency, right? I think that's the key to finding people that thrive in startups, because if you get even really, really smart, high agency folks, but their ego's too big, you can maybe have a couple of them on the team and figure out how to manage it, but it can't be the rule of thumb. So it's there's not a lot of, you're right, that startups are not for the majority of folks. And so, in our hiring processes, we try to screen for the type of folks that we think will thrive in those more ambiguous environments. And we don't always get it right, but I think we do a pretty good job. And one of the things we do specifically is at both my companies, even before we knew what product or industry even we were going to be in, we created company values. And those values while not overtly biblical. I think if you were to read them, you would recognize kind of where the genesis of them, where they come from, and trying to imbibe those throughout the whole company and the culture. To me, that's how you help drive the culture. I tell folks that if I get hit by a bus today and no longer here in the company, I hope that the company continues to live by those values and culture, and it thrives. Because culture is really something that, can scale. I'm not a gardener. I kind of fantasize sometimes about being a gardener, but I don't think I'm patient enough. But I think cultivating our company's values is probably as close to gardening as I'm going to get, because there's a lot of weeds you got to pull sometimes, and things you've got to, plant and be patient with, and make sure that it's you continue to stay on top of it, because it's entropy is definitely the natural state of values, and so that's definitely something that's a big focus of what I try to do.
You remind me of one of the most, I'd say, ignored or overlooked scriptures, John 14:12, where Jesus says, "And if you believe in me, you'll do the things that I've done, and even greater things will you do, because I go to the Father." And it's a pretty remarkable promise he's making to the people he's, let's use the term, hired here for a second. I don't know if he, quote unquote, hired or brought on board as his disciples anybody smarter than he was, but his expectations was that they were going to do greater things than he'd done. And that's a pretty amazing promise, really. I'm shocked by it, but I appreciate hearing you say your goal there is to hire people smarter than you are. But I suspect there are not many rooms you go into that at least the people around might not think you're smarter than they are. So anyway, keep working at it that way, Justin. You've been super generous with your time, and we could go on for a long time. I hope we're going to get a chance to chat with you again, because I got another whole list of questions I'd love to go down with you, but I also want to keep my promise today to keeping this maybe not too exhausting.
Justin, very thankful for your time and your efforts to do good in the world, which I think includes making jobs for people and having dreams, and in many respects having dominion over the earth that we're given in the garden. And we do that through a multitude of gifts, and it's neat to hear the stories of how you've been doing that through and continue to do that. And so thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. Rick, thank you so much for having me, and happy to jump on anytime.
Thanks for watching and listening. Don't forget to click the like button on your app. You can find more episodes like this at our website, whenloveleads.com. While there, you can also sign up for our newsletter, where we explore many of these topics deeper, and be the first to hear about upcoming podcast topics and guests. You can help more people find out about the podcast by liking us on social media pages like Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Finally, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Until next time, remember the difference it makes when love leads.